Welcome back to the Family Movie Night podcast, where we want to help your family have better conversations around the content you consume. This is episode 64, and as you probably have already seen from the title, we are talking about 2015's Inside Out. I just realized I guessed that it came out in 2015. Let me double check on that. That's my gut on this. But in case
You're
you
right.
Okay, well, there you go. There you go. I am not great at just pulling facts out of my head. Movie dates are some random skill I have that I could just pop. They just come into my head. So 2015's Inside Out from Pixar. In case you haven't seen this, which if you're a parent, I don't know how that's possible. With Disney Plus, I feel like this movie would just be on repeat. I know my kids have watched it like 3 times. This is a movie about a young girl named Riley, who is kind of on the cusp of being a preteen, or is a preteen, kind of on the cusp of, puberty and all of that. And it is a look inside her head to the emotions that kind of run her life: joy, sadness, disgust, fear, and anger are the 5 that run that. And it really is about this time in her life where sadness starts to kind of taint a little bit of all of her memories and a lot of her emotions, as happens with many a preteen. And mom and dad in the real world are freaking out about it. But also the main character, Joy, played by Amy Poehler, is also freaking out as everything that was the personality of young Riley is disappearing, and it feels like the world is falling apart. Joy and sadness must work together to kind of bring Riley back to wholeness, or maybe to something brand new. And so we're going to be talking about that movie today, and I am talking with the hero of our podcast, who in this case is sadness. Sadness is the hero of Inside Out. Donnie Dorsey, did you really relate to Phyllis from The Office as sadness?
Of course, because sometimes you feel like you're like, well, what am I supposed to be doing here? Like, I'm just kind of here. But sadness kind of realizes, oh, wait, you have to have a little sprinkle of these things to appreciate. It's kind of the idea of, you can't appreciate the it's kind of like the idea you can't appreciate the sunshine without, the rain.
Yeah, that's right.
And so many people were like, hey, I'm going to avoid, if I avoid all sad things, it'll make me live a happier life. But a lot of times it means that when you do finally experience it, it usually feels like the bottom is falling out. So I'll take it.
There you go. Well, I will say, Donnie, you're always the rainy cloud on this podcast. So, but of course, the villain of the podcast, which I think is very fitting, because also if Donnie's our rain, Sawyer definitely our sunshine, and Joy is definitely the villain of this episode. So Sawyer, how are you feeling? I want to go out on a limb and say I bet there's a lot of times in your life you have related to Joy.
I don't know which of the emotions I relate to the most in this movie.
Well, you contain multitudes, Sawyer. I will say that you're a complex person.
I was about to say I'm a complex person. I'm just a very high maintenance person. Anyways, no, I mean I like this movie, and this movie continues the tradition of Pixar movies of the plucky, charismatic protagonist actually being the villain, similarly to Woody. And I'm excited to talk about this movie.
Yeah, I think this movie is going to have a lot of stuff. And in fact, we have a great interview that we're doing something a little different on this podcast. I think it's going to be a lot of, I think it's going to be very helpful to you as a parent. And I'm excited for that. But before we get to that, Donnie Dorsey, sadness himself, tell us what we do on this podcast.
Yeah, so on this podcast, we encourage every family at Community Christian Church to have a monthly movie night to help you and your children build memories and start conversations that matter. The goal of our family ministry is to help you raise your children to love Jesus and his way of life above all other things. And we know that critical to that is for you to have routine, regular times of connection and shared experiences that'll help you build stronger relationships.
And on this podcast, we want to not only recommend some movies you could watch on your monthly movie night, but give you some ideas of meaningful conversations you can have with your children during or after the movie. And as always, the point of this podcast is not to add another thing to your list of things as a parent you feel guilty about not doing. We want to make it easier for you and your kids to enjoy being together so you can build memories and have conversations that matter.
And I think Inside Out is a great movie to do that. I think there's a movie that probably we don't have to recommend because I think most families have already seen this. I've got to imagine you guys have watched this. But here's what I will say. I think if you got young kids, this movie is really good and helpful in just trying to introduce the idea of like emotions and attitudes and moods. I've heard some parents say, like, who's on the controls of your life right now? Is it anger? Is it, sadness? Being able to kind of talk about that with your young kids. But I was shocked because I'll just start about this movie. I watched this movie when it came out before I had kids. I think by the time it had come out, no, I'm going to say this came out in the summer. So I'm going to say my wife was not even pregnant yet. So we didn't even have kids when I first watched this. And I found it very emotional and very helpful. And then I watched it again when I had a 2-year-old. And I was very emotional watching it that time. But watching it this time with an 11-year-old daughter who is going through all the preteen things, this movie was like so powerful to me this time because it was more relatable than it had ever been. There were entire conversations that were had in the movie between dad and daughter, mom and daughter. And also, in case you don't know, like the character Joy is kind of the representative of the parents, right? And Joy's kind of like inner monologue that she's kind of talking things out about watching, oh, she used to be into this and she used to be like this. And now I just don't know. I don't know anymore. Man, that was so relatable and was so good, but also in such a way that's so funny and really sweet and emotional, but in the way that the movie is. I would not call this like a heavy movie. Even the sadness is sweet. Like it's this, it just, to me, it inspires beauty and love within people. And I think for a long time, I'd kind of discounted this movie as like a good Pixar movie, but maybe not like an amazing one. And like, it's one of those that I've said, like, I respect it because it's so structural. Like it's so like just the structure of the movie is perfect, like from a script level. And like, I respected it, but it didn't hit me. Man, this movie hit me in a way that like when I was younger, Ratatouille hit me. And now as an adult, Ratatouille don't do nothing for me. But like when I was a kid, and it's one that I'm like, I respect what's happening, but I'm not interested in like a young rat figuring out his career. But when I was 17, I really was worried. I was like, I'm like a young rat trying to figure out his passions and career. Now I am the dad in Inside Out, not Remy the rat. So that's my journey through this movie, but I highly recommend it, especially. And I'll say this, even if you've watched it, if you got a preteen in the house, you make yourself go watch it. So let's go to this. Donnie Dorsey. I'm confident you've seen the movie before, but what was it like the first time you watched it and this time watching it?
I feel like this is one of those things that when I first watched it, I enjoyed it because I liked the idea of an abstract way of approaching people dealing with emotions and how they're kind of portrayed. But watching it now with like having older kids and stuff like that, I see so many moments where I can see kind of almost an animation in my head going, oh yeah, this is what's happening right now. And I probably need to address that versus these things. And it's just, it does such a good job of helping people understand that all of the whole full scope of our emotions are important. Like they're not always the most negative of things. And I think, we point out, hey, this kid has anger issues, but then the question goes, is it because of something else? Because most times it's just the thing that shows at the surface, where there's
Right.
other things that they're dealing with where there may be a lot of hurt, a lot of pain that, and they display it in that way. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I enjoyed it then. I enjoyed it this time too.
Has there ever been a more relatable scene in movie history than that dinner table scene that was the first trailer for Inside? If people remember, there's the very first trailer, is just that dinner table scene where you go in every mom, dad, Riley's head and see the decisions made. Donnie, have you ever seen anything that just made you go, that's dinner at my house?
Oh my gosh, like especially with the kids, because there's those moments where you're like, okay, we're good, and then like your brain's like, oh no, I see the face, we're about to have an issue.
We left the Brazilian helicopter pilot for this. It's great, man. That whole thing, that just, so funny, so insightful. Sawyer, what you got?
I really enjoy this movie. There's kind of just no. I'm not gonna set it up at all. I loved this movie from the first time I saw that trailer. I love that trailer. It's a thing that's one of my favorite trailers of all time.
I do think it's top 10 trailers of all time because you
Yeah,
instantly get what the movie is, and it doesn't give much away.
exactly. Anyways, we don't need to dissect the trailer right now. Anyways,
We have a
but
second podcast on our
yeah,
Patreon page that is
it's
just
literally
us
just
just
me ranting about trailers. Yeah,
it's just Nathan and Sawyer dissecting movie trailers.
yeah. Anyways, but no, I really really enjoy this movie. Um, and I think that what you guys have talked about, the way that it examines our emotions. I don't think that this movie is the most accessible movie for children when it comes to the Pixar movies. Because I definitely have interacted with kids who are like, yeah, it's funny and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, but it's like all like, especially right when it came out, I was doing children's ministry very like in a small level and stuff like that. And I remember, like, did you guys watch Inside Out this week? And they're like, yeah, it was funny. And I was like, yeah. And then like they moved on within like 30 seconds and stuff like that. And I was like, that movie is amazing though. And I think that, Nathan, what you were talking about earlier, there is a level to which I think this movie might actually be more valuable for parents than it is for the children. Because I think that this
It
movie,
is the Pixar model.
it
They
really is.
write to parents, not to kids.
Yeah. And I think that this movie really nails like parents struggle with kids changing is the thing. And I think there are a lot of Pixar movies that are kind of about that. This movie takes a really great angle is the thing with the character of Joy, because I think that like it worked making her be the one that screws everything up, because as a parent, that's how you probably feel. And I say that not as a parent, but as someone who has talked to parents. And that's what they say all the time is I feel like I screwed this up and stuff like that. And I really appreciate this movie for willing to have that conversation and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I really love this movie. It's a great movie.
Well, and I'll say, I think it's accessible to kids. I think everything's just on different levels as we were even talking about it. I think for kids, my kids, when they watch it, always relate to a single emotion. So one kid is like, oh yeah, I feel like sadness all the time, and not like depression sad, but like they kind of like, oh, everything's a little sad. And I got another one who's kind of like, oh no, anger. I'm frustrated by things, one who's fearful, one who's really joyful all the time. Like I think they relate on that, but they don't understand the greater themes behind it. I think when you're kind of in your 20s and you don't have kids yet, you're just appreciating like, wow, this is really inventive and like really a great way to talk about it. But then, like you said, when you're a parent, I think it's your lived experience. It's what you feel. And like you said about Joy, yeah, I definitely think she is the parent surrogate. And in particular, and this kind of gets to our themes for the movie that I'm going to get to talk with our guest about, is this idea that really this movie is a great way to talk to our kids about their emotions and really to help them understand there are no bad emotions, that all emotions are necessary, right? Jesus felt every emotion. We see Jesus feel sadness. We see Jesus in the garden feel this kind of anxiety, right? That he gets to a point, he sweats blood. Like he is so, we see the anger of God in Jesus, right? We certainly see the joy of God, right? We see all of these emotions coming out of Jesus at all times, right? And being able to say that all of those are healthy reactions. Donnie, as a dad, do you ever kind of see in your kids this feeling of like, and I don't know, because it may be different for your kids' personalities, but this kind of feeling of, I'm supposed to feel happy all the time? Like, do you see that in your kids, that they feel at times like, oh man, I need to feel, I'm supposed to feel happy.
Yeah, I think I see it mostly with when they have things that they want or things that they've like longed for or like wanted to have, like they'll get a gift or something that they're really excited about, and then they get to this point where they're like, I don't know what to do, like this uncertainty of things. And I think it's that idea of, I think it is that, and the thing of like, I should be like over the moon, I should be like super excited, I should be doing all these things with it, but I don't, or I can't,
Yeah.
because I think, especially with my kids, I always kind of like see just the little nuances of things that I realize that I have to make sure to pay very close attention to, because much like with this movie is that as a parent, we find ourselves focusing on our kids' happiness more than
Yes.
anything, and it's the
Yes.
idea of, and I think that's that kind of that line that we kind of teeter on with the being the friend, because as a friend you want the kid to always be happy, like you want that person to always be happy, like when you have that friend type relationship you're working on the happiness, but a true relationship involves all of those emotions. Like
Yeah.
some of my best friends that I've had over the years, we've not agreed on things, but in had anger or sadness or hurt or whatever it was, and in those moments, in those deep emotions or those multitude of emotions is when like it develops that individual more than anything, because you can be happy all the time, I use air quotes for that, because you can be happy all the time but not feel joy,
Hmm.
because it doesn't necessarily, they don't equate, because what people view happiness as is that happiness is that everything goes right, but it's not, because I've had times where things didn't go right, but I still saw good in that moment. And I think that's
Yeah.
something that is so important for us as parents to remember, is to teach our kids to don't focus on what makes you the happiest. Focus on the joy, which is understanding that in spite of my circumstances, I'm still okay. And what I often try to put in with that is that no matter, like, God may not always get you out of it, but he'll get you through it,
Yeah.
whatever you're going through. And so like it's that, and that's resonated with me when I first heard it, is like I was like, that makes so much sense, because so much time we want to pull them out of the pain. We're like, oh, let me fix them. Oh, you're upset. Let me just make them happy. It's like, no, sometimes they have to sit in that for a minute.
Well, so they can build the skills to deal with it. Because I think
Exactly.
you're right, Donnie. I think what is something about, maybe it's modern, maybe it's something about our culture, or maybe it's just human nature. We as humans, it feels like, well, it's even written into our Declaration of Independence. We think it is a right to pursue happiness, that happiness is the goal. That if I can get to a place where I'm just happy. And so then what happens is sadness, anger, these are the enemy. They are the enemy to be defeated. And what we often do is, let me just push that anger down, or let me just not think about the sadness. But what I try to say to my kids a lot is, sadness is often the right emotion to feel.
Hmm.
Anger is sometimes the right emotion to feel. Hurt. Even sometimes, we talked in the last episode about healthy anxiety. Sometimes being nervous is the right thing, because it means you care about what you're doing. It
Yep.
means it matters to you. The goal is to say, how do I meet God in every emotion? How can God be my comforter when I'm sad? How can I trust that God is going to make things right and just when I'm angry? How can I meet God to be the one who removes my fear when I'm nervous, right? To meet God in the emotion. And as parents, I think it's really important. The most tragic part of this movie to me is that early on scene when the parents say, can I know things are hard right now, but can you just be our happy girl? And I just remember, I was like, I remember kind of being that way as a kid. Is like, I kind of need to hide my sadness from my parents because I want them to think I'm happy and I'm okay with what's going on. Or to also, I know as a parent, sometimes I'm like, there is something, and I hear parents say this all the time. It's like, I want them to be innocent like a child. What they mean is happy. And this is what I've learned is there is something they say, oh, the innocence is gone when they feel that kind of the mixture of joy and sadness, but it's not. It means they've now matured to a point that they can deal with the world as it is. They're actually aware, right? When you're young, you're oblivious to how the world works. And so everything is just a simple emotion. I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm whatever. But everyone knows as an adult, sometimes you're happy and you're scared. And we talked about it's a roller coaster. Sometimes you're happy and you're sad, and we call that nostalgia. We call those memories. Sometimes you have this mixture. You cry. My kids don't understand, why is daddy crying? Is he sad? No, I'm happy. There is a beauty that comes out in the joy and the sadness. And we want to help our kids be able to talk about that, because the problem is when those emotions get logged up inside of them, because then they can turn into other things. And so we have a great interview. I'm assuming it's great. I haven't filmed it yet, but I have it with Jason Collins, our teaching pastor on staff. People on this podcast know him from our other podcasts, and certainly from his role at our church. But many people may not know that Jason is actually in school again to become a counselor. And that's a great thing that he's going to bring to our church. But I thought it would be a great opportunity to talk to him, who is certainly much more accredited than any of the three of us to talk about. And he can kind of give us some tips on how do you talk about difficult emotions with your kids. And so I'm going to toss that to him, and we will see you guys next week as we have some more movies to recommend to help you and your kids love Jesus and his way of life even more. I'll see you then. All right, well, I'm here with Jason, not only teaching pastor extraordinaire, but counselor extraordinaire.
Almost.
But yeah, I think I said this when we were recording the other part that you're going to school for it, but you have years of pastoral counseling
I do.
experience. So, Jason, in this movie Inside Out, one of the big things that kind of comes out is the parents' inability to talk to their now preteen daughter about her emotions. And I know in my experience talking with parents and things, and just my experience as a parent, sometimes it's difficult to talk to our children about their more difficult emotions, you know? And we said this on the podcast. I know you agree with this. There are no bad emotions.
That's right.
But there are ones that for some reason are more difficult for us to talk about. Things like sadness and fear, anger.
Yeah.
You know, joy and happiness tend to be the ones we like to see in our kids.
Yeah.
Why is it that it's difficult for parents to want to talk about it?
There's lots of reasons. But I think, not to use emotional language to describe emotional language, but I think there's a lot of fear involved in allowing our children to experience those kind of negative emotions because we're afraid of where it might lead. And I'm not saying that that's it. There isn't some legitimacy in that. Parents often afraid of if my child gets too far down the sadness end of the spectrum,
Right.
then we're afraid of suicide and self-harm come into play sometimes, especially because that is certainly on the rise in the teenage world. We're also afraid if I let my child go too far down the anger route, then it can wind up in some destructive kind of ways. They could act out in school and with friends, and there could be bad things happen there. So there's a fear of that is attached to that. One of the things that's important for us to do, and I was just talking to one of my colleagues in the counseling world about this the other day, is to do what we call normalizing emotions. And all that is so simple. It's just to allow a person to experience the emotion in a space where they understand that it's okay to feel what you feel. Because like you said, there are no bad emotions.
Right.
Emotions come. They are what I feel. The thing that's most important is you allow that to be what it is, and then help process what that means.
Right.
And once your kids get to be teenagers, they have the ability to process and think about their emotions.
Right.
And decide, okay, this is how I feel. This is why I feel it. This is normal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not weird. And not only that, there is an appropriate way to express this emotion.
Right.
And I think so many times parents want to, they want to sort of short circuit that process rather than walking with the child through it.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk a lot about helicopter parents.
Right.
And a lot of the problem with the helicopter parenting is I want to jump in. As soon as my kid feels sadness, I want to jump in. I want to short circuit that. Stop that. Let's fix it. Let's get you as fast as we can from being sad to being happy. And if we can get you to happy fast, all is well. Not necessarily.
Right.
Because now you've said to that child, it's not okay to feel sad. So the next time they feel sad and you're not around to jump in and short circuit it, now they're in despair because now something's wrong with me. Rather than doing that, we come in and we go, let's talk about why you feel sad. It's normal to feel sad. In fact, mom and dad feel sad.
Right.
And here's what we do when we feel sad. We have people to talk to. We have other things that can help us process why that is. And honestly, I mean, we have this in Scripture. We have laments in Scripture that help us to understand, no, being sad is a normal part of the human experience. It's okay to be sad and to express that to people, express that to God even, and to go through that process and come out on the other side with a little bit of a sense of, now that I've felt it, now what can I do?
Right.
Now we can get closer to what can I do to feel peace and joy and happiness again, but not before the process is done, if that makes sense.
I think so. So normalizing it is really important.
Huge.
And I know when our girls, when we first got our 3 daughters in the home, and we had a therapist at the time who could do in-home therapy with the girls, she would regularly tell us it was important as my job as the parent. And so these are younger, I think younger, because I think you were talking well about with teenagers, they can think about their own emotions. But what she said is young children, and because of our girls and the situation they came out of, they were younger than their age, emotionally and all of that. She said, you almost have to go through the practice of naming their emotions and helping them to understand, this thing you're feeling, that's called anger.
Yes.
And they talked about, and I know you've said this in a sermon, having a wide variety of language to be able to say, you're not sad, you're disappointed.
Yes, that's important. And I was going to mention this, and you, if we could find it, maybe even bring this up on the screen or maybe provide a link to it in the description. But there is what's called I think it's called the emotion wheel.
Okay.
It was developed by a therapist, and it's rainbow colored. If you got it up on the screen, maybe they're looking at it right now. But it starts in the center with those very elementary, easy to understand emotions that if you have young children at home, 4, 5, 6 years old, they know sad, mad, happy. Those are the emotions and you can start there and give them those. But as they grow in maturity, this emotion wheel is really important to even help us widen our vocabulary. Like you said, a child may have the ability to say, well, I'm just mad. Well, okay, you're mad, but let's talk about what shade of mad are you?
Right.
Are you just disappointed? Did something not go your way, and now you're just not happy about the fact that it didn't go your way? Well, that's different than mad. Or do you feel maybe slighted? Maybe someone did something to you that you thought you deserved, and now there's anger coming out of that. Well, as your kid grows, again, when they're 4 or 5 years old, they're just mad. And then we talk about mad.
Right.
And we allow them to process mad. But then as they grow older, we add in those words that they're more able to process. And then we add those extra words that are out on the concentric circles of the emotion wheel. And we help them to get at, now we're actually processing. Now we're actually taking them from, I'm not just feeling an emotion. There's a reason why I feel this emotion. So what is there something that was done wrong to you, or maybe something you did wrong? Processing all of that stuff helps them to grab hold of not just the why of why I feel the way I do, but what do I do when I feel this way?
Right.
What's the next action step that I take?
Right.
So that's why it's important to, as you said, put a name on it, and that emotion wheel will really help you do that. In fact, I'll just say this, in the counseling world, a lot of counselors, I've seen so many counseling offices where they just put one up on the wall. And one of the things they do when they first come into the session is they do what's called a check-in. And you say, hey, look at the emotion wheel, and you just kind of pick a word out and tell me how you are today.
That's good.
And so this is something that you could also practice with your kids in back to what we said earlier, normalizing emotions.
Yes.
Kid comes home from school, and you can almost always see they're in a certain way. There's an affect that they're showing at that point, and you don't know exactly what it is. And so then you can say, hey, use one of our emotion words.
Right.
If you've taught them this, use one of those emotion words and tell me what's going on. Now we've got a conversation.
Yeah.
Which now leads to the processing.
Yeah.
So we've normalized, we've processed, you're putting your child in a better position to actually not just know emotions, but know how to handle them.
Well, I think that's a good example of practices that I think we can do as parents.
Yeah.
Like you said, to be able just to talk about it, and I think make it easier for us to be able to have those conversations of having something in front of me, because that often helps me as the parent to, now I have something to reference. That if they can't come up with something, I might be able to help them talk it out to a point.
Exactly. And I was going to say this too. You made me think of this. And I'm not being critical, but it's just true. Most of us adults, as parents, we don't know enough about our own emotions.
Yes.
And that's part of the reason why we have a hard time delving into the topic with our kids, is because we haven't dealt with our own stuff. So I would say to almost every parent, all of us can do this. You need to get with some of your emotions, and you need to start naming those things and get comfortable and normalize your own stuff before you can do it with your child.
Well, and I think it's important when you talk about that, maybe you can talk about these. There are a lot of missteps that I know I, as a parent, I think all parents take. One we mentioned before we did this when we were filming on Saturday about the movie where the mom says to her, she's feeling sad, and she goes, I know this is hard, but can you just be my happy girl? Can you just be the happy girl, because she's trying. And the mom, I think, is like you said, she's trying to get her back to, she's trying to make it positive. And I know another one that I think, I've got now a preteen and we're heading to the more complicated emotions. Just like you want to teach your kids when they're little, and I'm doing this with some of my kids because they're little enough of, hey, here's the appropriate way to show you're mad. I'm still doing the go upstairs and scream in a pillow, or, do that. Don't hit your sister. Don't call her a name.
Right.
But there are ways, don't ignore you're mad. If you're mad, do something about it. But that's not helpful. But as my wife and I are, learning a lot these days about our 11-year-old, because of the hormones that are going through her body, because all that, I think parents learning to have grace for their kids of they're not going to express it appropriately. And instead of the older they get, condemning them for, that's not the way we do this. That's not the way. My wife does this thing, and it's honestly really good. If my older daughter speaks she's clearly emotional and she speaks disrespectfully, whereas to the younger one, I'd go, no, you can't talk that way. With her, she does a really good job of saying, you must be really upset because I know you're too respectful of a girl to ever choose to speak that way. And it's a really gracious way of getting into the conversation of saying, I know that you're respectful. I know this, but what you said wasn't. So tell me what you're feeling, because that's the thing I want to address, not the thing.
And what your wife is teaching your daughter in that moment is to do this on her own.
Right.
And that's what you want eventually, is you want her to not react in inappropriate ways to her anger. You want her to contemplate for a moment, stop and say, why am I angry? I'm normally not like this.
Right.
And again, and just to say there's something, because anger is always an alert that something isn't right.
Right.
And so it's always an opportunity to ask questions. And that's what I think she's done really well with that method, is to say, I want to ask a question that's going to get me to there, which then teaches your daughter to ask the question. I can ask that question of myself. The thing I tell clients all the time is the beautiful thing about being human is that we're the only creature on earth that has the ability to think about our own thoughts. And the more you can train your child to think about what they're thinking and to test it, and as to put it in a scriptural term, to take captive every thought and bring it into obedience to the Lord Jesus Christ. That's what we're doing, is we're saying, I feel an emotion. It is causing me to think thoughts that are leading me to actions. What is that in me?
Right.
Why am I doing this? And, in the moment, it feels like that can't, because as a parent, what you want to do is you just want to, like I said, cut it off. The proper way to do this is always going to be harder, and it's always going to take more time. And that's the thing that we resist against. We don't want it to be hard. We want parenting to be easy, and we don't want to take time with it. We want it instantly. We want it right now. And neither one of those is conducive to the processing that has to happen in order for our kids to know how to handle emotions.
So what are some practices that people can do because like you said, it's going to take time, and I think it's important for parents to understand I may not need to wait until my child is having an overreaction to jump into it. So there may be daily things. I think one thing I'm going to take from this, I do think that we'll put a link in the description for it. I do think I'm going to print it off because we have things like that in our home, but we don't have this. And I think it would be good. It's just a daily practice to either start the day or, like you said, in the middle of the day to say, did anything happen today that made you feel any of these emotions? Yes. Let's talk about that. And I know we both listened to Pastor Andy Stanley, who I know often at night, he said when his kids were young, he would sit with them and say, what's in your heart?
It's the state of your heart.
Yeah, because Jesus says it's out of the heart that all these sinful and damaging and unhealthy things come from. Yeah. So let's do that. Are there other things, though, that just almost like emotional checkups that parents can do with their kids to get them used to having the conversation? Yeah. So then when the overreaction happens, we're at least in practice.
Well, you just said it. I mean, that it's a daily check-in. It's you normalize, you don't just normalize the fact that I'm a creature that feels emotions for your kid. You normalize the fact that we can talk about this stuff. Right. This is not a taboo subject. It's almost like I see the same thing happen on touchy topics in the home, like sex. We treat it like something that's there. We know one day we'll get to it, but we just don't talk about it. We do that with emotions. We don't have the day-to-day stuff. We talk about, like, I said this in a parent seminar that we just taught here a few weeks back. We're real good at saying, what happened at school today? What were your grades? How much homework do you have? How are you doing in school? A lot of what happened kind of things, but we rarely ask our kids, how does that feel?
Right.
And I know some people, they shy away from that because honestly, we don't do it enough on our own, but we don't know how to handle what if my kid does say how they're feeling? I don't know what to say. Well, we've got to just sit in it sometimes.
Yeah.
And so back to what you were asking, it needs to be a regular topic of conversation. And what you just described of putting up the emotion wheel, having the question asked pretty regularly. But again, by just asking your child to reveal it in normal times, like you said, not when the anger is through the roof and we're having a hard time controlling our anger. No, we talk about the normal times when I'm just irritated.
Right.
When I'm just off. When you just come home and you're blah. You talk about those moments and you make that normal so that when the more severe stuff comes, we're already in a posture of emotions are okay. They're welcomed in this house. We are okay to talk about them. And I'm a safe place as your parent to come and talk about that stuff.
Right.
Because a lot of times I think our kids get to a point where they feel like this is too much. I can't share this with mom or dad. They won't accept me, or they'll be mad at me if I say that I feel this way. Well, the more you expose emotions in your home and you, again, normalize it and make it a topic of conversation, they'll realize there's no emotion that's off limits with mom or dad.
Right.
They will accept me. I said many times to my daughters growing up, there is nothing that you will tell daddy for the rest of your life that will ever make me turn my back on you and to love you any less than I do. So you tell me whatever is inside of your heart, whatever is going on in you, it's okay. Now, did they do that all the time? No.
Yeah.
Because no parent and none of us are perfect on that. But we do the best that we can to make our homes and make our person, ourselves, a safe place for them to come and say that, whatever it is.
I think that's really helpful, and I think it's good, especially as you're moving into those for parents. You're moving into those teenage years, because what you're talking about there is it is why teenagers often will go to their friends with things, because they feel like I can say anything to my friends, and it's not because their friends are the most accepting. It's because their friends are young and they don't know what to do about it.
That's right.
So they say it and they just go, "Oh, okay, that's great." They don't know what to say, but but it feels like acceptance when I can say something to you. And it doesn't get met with, you shouldn't think that way. You shouldn't feel that way. You shouldn't act that way.
That's a great point. I mean, when every emotion is not something you need to jump in and fix.
Right.
Just because a kid comes home from school and says, I had a crappy day, you don't have to necessarily come in and fix all the crap, so to speak. You can just sit with your kid and tell me why. Tell me more about that. And then it's often appropriate for you to say, I'm sorry, that really stinks.
Yep. I have days like that too.
I have days like that too. And you know what? We're just gonna get some rest tonight. We're gonna have some dinner. And you know what? We're gonna pray. We're gonna release that to God, and we're gonna pray that tomorrow's a better day.
Yep.
Let me know how that goes. And that's it.
And then you just
And that's okay, because they need that as much as anything. Because if you get into this mindset of every negative emotion must be met with a very near complete resolution, and it's got to be fixed, well, then when you go through a period of time where you're going to have some down days, you're going to have some struggle days, and if it doesn't get fixed, then I start thinking something's wrong with me.
Yep.
And then the anxiety starts to roll around, and it gets more, and it snowballs, and then you just get on a track where you can't get out of it.
Yep.
So you just, it's okay to sit in the junk.
Yes.
That's the point of what I'm trying to say.
And I think that's the encouragement we want to give you. So, Jason, thank you for doing this. And I think we hope you guys join us next week as we continue to talk about conversations around the content you consume with your kids and help them love Jesus and his way of life even more. We'll see you.